Welcome to the Dugout Report, episode number 16. I am here with Sarah Sanchez from bleedcubbieblue, and I'm interested to hear what her thoughts are on the Cubs this season and everything beside that. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Alexander. I'm excited to be here.
So what are your initial thoughts on the Heyward's situation?
Wow, yeah, that was a big one. It was a rough conversation that I think people knew was coming for a couple of years. He has not, and this happens with long contracts, right? Like you sign a free agent to a long contract, and by the time they get towards the end of the deal, they're maybe not producing in the same way that they were at the start of the deal. You have young talent coming up. I think that it's disappointing that fans won't get a chance to say goodbye to Jay Hay on the field. I hope the Cubs arrange something this season where even though he's injured, he can at least be there, hear our appreciation for the time that he spent with the team. I think he's been an incredible teammate by all accounts. He had a huge role in that 2016 World Series. If you remember, during the rain delay, we all heard how Jayson Heyward really rallied the troops during that 17-minute rain delay and got them back believing in themselves and in what they could accomplish after they had squandered a lead late in Cleveland. And beyond that, I think he's done incredible things in the city of Chicago. He's building a baseball academy here on the Southwest side that's going to serve hundreds and thousands of kids and get them introduced to the sport and to the game. I have some wonderful Jayson Heyward memories. And I also think that from a business perspective, it was time, he can't be blocking playing time for Seiya Suzuki. He can't be blocking playing time for Christopher Morel. He can't be blocking playing time for Nelson Velasquez. The Cubs have a lot of young talent that they need to see on the field. So it's unfortunate. I hope fans get a chance to say goodbye. And I will always be grateful for the time that Jay Hay has spent in Chicago.
My next question is, what are your thoughts on the Cubs season as a whole?
Oh, that's a loaded question, Alexander. Let's see. I think that the Cubs really needed everything to go right, and they needed to hit on a bunch of question mark pieces in order to be a competitive team this year. What I mean by that is they needed Wade Miley to be healthy and effective. They needed Drew Smyly to be healthy and effective. They needed Adbert Alzolay to come back right around now. They needed Kyle Hendricks to be Kyle Hendricks, the guy we know who only gets guys out, right? Like he's just doing his thing. They didn't really get that. They lost about 6 weeks of playing time from Seiya Suzuki with that finger injury. They had some start and stops in terms of the starting rotation. I mean, if I told you at the start of the season that not only would Keegan Thompson be in the rotation, but Justin Steele would also be in the rotation and Adrian Sampson would be getting regular starts, people would be like, what has gone wrong? And so I think that the lack of starting pitching and the lack of health among starting pitching really impacted this team's ability to compete. Now, I want to say, I think that this is a winnable division. It's a place where any of our, the Cardinals are not world beaters. They didn't go out and trade for Juan Soto. The Brewers are a beatable team, as we can see. They traded their closer. I think that the Cubs should be planning to reload for next season. I hope they extend Wilson Contreras. I think that he is the heart of this current team. He's a connection to that 2016 team that's really important for fans. It's really important to the young guys. You can see him mentoring Christopher Morel and Nelson Velasquez in the dugout. It's an incredible thing to see. And they're like a shortstop and a starter away from being able to compete in this division. And I hope that that's the plan for the offseason.
So what are your thoughts for the rest of the series against the Nationals before they make the trip to Cincinnati?
So the Nationals are like one of the only teams that's having a worse go of it than the Cubs right now. Like I just told you that the Cubs needed everything to go right, and that didn't happen. The Nationals haven't had anything go right either. They just made the biggest trade, I think, in modern baseball history, trading a 23-year-old who looks a lot like Ted Williams to the Padres for a bunch of prospects and a hope to reload that farm system. And I suppose there's a chance one of those prospects is as good as Juan Soto, but I am skeptical that any of them will pan out in that way. I think that this is a winnable series for the Cubs. I was at the game last night. The pitching for the Nationals is not particularly strong. That starting pitching for them is worse even than what the Cubs has seen. They don't have a lot of great hitters up and down the lineup. They have not been a particularly dangerous lineup to face for pitchers. And so it's a nice series for the Cubs to get some wins under their belt to head into Cincinnati in that Field of Dreams game and really maybe showcase the good of this team. Like, this team does look pretty good when you watch them in fits and starts, right? Like, Patrick Wisdom hits really long home runs. Nelson Velasquez has plus power. Christopher Morel does everything. He plays great defense and he runs the bases well, and he hits to get on base, and he hits for power a little bit. Willson Contreras is Willson Contreras. I mean, ending the game last night on a strike him out, throw him out double play, I thought was perfection. And he's just grinning behind the plate, having the best time of his life, which is pretty incredible. So I think that there's a lot of fun and a lot of talent on this Cubs team. As opposed to the Nationals team doesn't have a ton of that at the moment. You know, they've got Keibert Ruiz, who is their rookie catcher, who's having a nice season behind the plate. Tomorrow afternoon, we're recording on Tuesday, so that'll be Wednesday afternoon. The Cubs will get to face off against Josiah Gray, who's another young pitcher of theirs. He was part of the return for Max Scherzer and Trey Turner, so I'm excited to see Josiah Gray. But there's a disconnect here, and I think the Cubs have some talent. They should go on a little bit of a run here against the Nationals in the Reds.
What are your thoughts on Willson Contreras?
I mean, I think he's the greatest. He's my favorite Cubs player of all time, so I'm a little bit biased here. But you know, I'm going to step back for a second. Last season at the trade deadline, we saw that this front office was willing to deal even the most beloved players in Chicago if they thought they were getting a good return. And it sounds like the market for Willson Contreras didn't really develop this trade season the same way the markets for Anthony Rizzo and Chris Bryant, Javier Baez developed last trade season. I think if a market had developed, they would have traded him. They traded Scott Efros. I didn't really think they were going to do that. Scott Efros could have been a Cub for the next 5 years, and he's got that wicked sidearm motion, kind of similar to our old friend Steve Cishek, who we saw last night. In fact, he took some advice from Steve Cishek to learn how to pitch effectively as a sidearm pitcher. But the market didn't develop. I think the market partially didn't develop because the best trade partner for the Cubs for Willson Contreras would have been a package deal with him and Ian Happ or maybe David Robertson to the Padres. And when the Padres traded for Juan Soto, they didn't really have a lot left to trade for a Willson Contreras or an Ian Happ. And so they kind of put the plug in that one. I'm unsure what happens next. I mean, could they offer him a qualifying offer? Yes. And if so, he might walk and test free agency, and the Cubs would then get a draft pick for that in the compensatory round. That compensatory round is later now than it used to be. So they had to be doing a calculation that they could get a better return with that draft pick than anything that teams were offering them at the trade deadline. And if that's true, then that's a smart thing to do. But secondarily, and here's the thing that I think is, there's two things that are important here. One, that qualifying offer sits around $18 million per year. There's a non-zero chance Willson would take that. It's about a $9 million raise over what he is making right now. And it's real close to what he's projected to get in an annual value in free agency. I think that contract in free agency would probably be like 4 years, $20 million with an option for a fifth year, maybe 3 years, $24 million with an option for a fourth year. But like, it's going to be right around there. And he appears to love Chicago. He really wanted to stay here. You can see on his face how much happier he is since the trade deadline. I mean, the 3 weeks leading up to the trade deadline were the worst weeks of Willson Contreras' season by far. He came back and immediately hit 2 opposite field home runs and a triple and has just been raking, right? Like he does something almost every game, and he's just got a lot of joy in the way that he plays. So there's a non-zero chance that he would take the qualifying offer. I think there's also a non-zero chance that if he's willing to sign here for 18 million instead of somewhere else for 20 million, that's something the Cubs should look into. They should see if they can lock him up to that deal and keep him a Cub for life. I mean, he's been a Chicago Cub since he was 16 years old. That is 14 years in the Cubs system. He's never known another team. I cheer for this team because I want there to be franchise players. I want a team that will sign a Ryan Sandberg to a career contract. I want a team that's in on at least trying to extend Greg Maddux. I know they didn't get that done, but they at least made an offer that was competitive. I think that they should extend Wilson Contreras. I think that it would be a good move organizationally. There's not a lot of good hitting catching talent out there. The robot umps are coming, maybe not next season, but the season after. And the worst part of Wilson's catching game is his framing. So if you get rid of umpires calling balls and strikes, all of a sudden Wilson Contreras is a much more valuable catcher, and all he's ever done is exceed expectations. So I don't know why the Cubs wouldn't give him a shot to exceed expectations on the north side of Chicago.
What were your thoughts on how the trade deadline went down and how the Cubs embraced it?
I mean, it was interesting. It was interesting to see where the markets developed and where they didn't, right? I think that part of the reason that the Cubs didn't make big deals with their position players is that the position player returns, with some exceptions, right? Like Juan Soto is obviously an exception. The position player returns were pretty light. They weren't a ton of blue chip prospects. You weren't going to get like a Pete Crow Armstrong like they did last year for Javier Baez in this particular market. And there's a benefit to the Cubs front office saying, you know what, we don't have to deal our players. We'll deal them when it makes sense, and we won't deal them when it doesn't make sense. And you don't want to be known as the team that's just going to sell no matter what, right? I look at what the Houston Astros gave up for 2 months of Christian Vasquez's time from the Red Sox, and they gave up their 28th and 29th best prospects. I mean, that's like, those are lottery tickets. Those aren't guys who you are necessarily, like, they could be good, but you're not planning on building the next great team in Boston around those two guys. They're just like two guys you might take a chance on. So I think that the position player market didn't quite develop, and so the Cubs didn't trade their two biggest trade chips in Contreras and in Happ. But the pitching market always is there, right? People always need reliever help at the deadline, and the Cubs took advantage of that by trading away David Robertson, trading away Michael Givens. I think the most interesting deal they made was the Efros for Hayden Wesneski deal. That deal on face, like when it first came out, was stunning to a lot of people, myself included. I didn't think they were going to trade Efros. I thought he was the closer of the future. But at this point, the Cubs have shown that they can develop some pretty good bullpen arms. What they've not been able to do is develop a bunch of starting pitchers. And Hayden Wesneski looks like he's going to be a back-end starter along the lines of like a Keegan Thompson or a Justin Steele within the next season or two. And that's valuable. He's 4 years younger than Scott Efros, and he's got the potential to start, which means that instead of getting like an inning or two here or there, 60 innings of work out of a season, I mean, you're getting 135, 140, 150 innings of work out of Hayden Wesneski, and I'm excited to see what he can do.
So my last question is, what are your thoughts on this upcoming Cubs-Reds series?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. So battle of the bottom dwellers, right? Like, these are the two worst teams in the NL Central, and they're the two teams that they got here by different routes, but let's be clear, like, neither of them really did anything that was going to be like, yes, this is a game changer that's going to make us competitive in the division. The Reds definitely have sold off more of their talent and players than the Cubs. I mean, Jesse Winker used to be a Red, Eugenio Suarez used to be a Red, Luis Castillo, those are all Mariners now, right? Like, Nick Castellanos opted out of his contract. Tyler Mahle isn't there anymore. Like, there's just like the Reds, you know, it's like Joey Votto is still there. Joey Votto is still there. So the Reds are, you know, they are definitely rebuilding, and we're going to see some young talent. That'll be interesting. The Cubs, on the other hand, are orchestrating, and I don't care what Jed Hoyer calls it, it's a rebuild. But they went out and made a couple of interesting moves in the offseason that are long-term, medium-term moves, right? They added Marcus Stroman, who will be pitching tonight, Tuesday night, against the Nationals. I'm excited to see what Marcus Stroman can do. He's looked really good the last couple of times out. They added Seiya Suzuki, who's a Cub for 5 years. And Seiya Suzuki's been in a little bit of a slump, but you can almost see the wheels turning with Seiya. Like, he's learning all of the pitchers. He's learning how they're going to attack him. He's making adjustments on the fly. I think Seiya's going to be just fine. So it'll be interesting to see how these two teams match up. I think that the whole Field of Dreams thing is a little bit, I don't know. It's a little like real deep in nostalgia for me, but it is fun and it is kind of cool. I think that the Cubs will be competitive in this series, but baseball is always going to surprise you. You never know what's going to happen, right? Like you can win one game 21-2, and then the next day you get shut out and you can't get any hits. So I like to say baseball's going to baseball, and I'm sure baseball can baseball in Cincinnati, but the Cubs have a shot to do a really nice job in this particular series, and I'm excited to see what they're going to do.
So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to come on. And I wish you the best of luck with everything that you do with the Cubs. And I hope to have you on back soon.
I would love that, Alexander. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.